Welcome back to the Thinc Conversation. Still with us is Titus Mafolo and Dr. Motene. Titus Mafolo, you're still coming nicely on that story that after 1948, and then what happened?
Well, I was saying that before 1948, the Carnegie report said that the South African government has to deal with the problem of poverty amongst whites. Mm-hmm. Accordingly, the laws were actually put in place to ensure that the white people, poor people, are actually going to be empowered. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate part is that that empowerment of poor white people was done at the expense of black people. Mm-hmm. Hence, the affirmative action for white people, I know the term is not being used, the white economic empowerment actually took a higher level, a higher trajectory when the National Party came into power in 1948. That meant that by 1970s, the problem of white poverty had been eradicated. Mm-hmm. It had been eradicated.
But what are those things that made it eradicated? To talk about that it was eradicated is another thing. Mm. Just if you could know what are those specific things they did, because for me that is the lesson.
Yeah, there are two processes. Mm. On the one hand, the white community had organized themselves into associations that dealt with white poverty, mm-hmm. right? So the associations were there, the cooperatives were actually formed, the cooperatives that brought about the KWV, that brought about your AFBOP, the insurance and burial societies.
Are these the cooperatives that Titus Mafolo, some of them, that you are, is it the same model, even if it might not be the same? Are they the same ones that you are dealing with in Titus Mafolo?
Yes. History has no blank pages, and you will, I hope you allow me to be a bit of a devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And feel certain gaps or narratives in our discourse regarding the history of our country. They say if the hunted do not write their history, the history will always glorify the hunter. Mm-hmm. Now, South Africa is a very interesting place, and that is why even during the colonial era, it was called the colonization of a special type. In the whole continent of Africa, 1.4 billion people, now 54 plus one countries.
But Titus Mafolo, I would like to hear more about the cooperatives that you are, and how are they?
Yes.
Similar to what Titus Mafolo is saying. Because for me, it is the lesson.
Yeah.
The history, we're not going to change it, guys. Yeah, we're not going to change it. It happened. But let's pull out what are the good out of that you are doing.
Yeah. I'm going to, I'll rush through it because I was trying to preface it. Might take long. The Dutch settled here, refreshment station, strife happens, others eventually leave the Cape Colony. There's a voortrekker and then the trekkers follow. Now, that followed the British annexing the Cape Colony and then following them everywhere where they were going. Yes, they were motivated by many factors, but the fact that they were small groups who had to depend on each other forced them to remain closely linked, because now there was a European force who had much more strength and might, who could vanquish them. So as they came inland, so it became necessary for them to stay together, just as you had a lot of black communities that stayed together and built kingdoms. So that in itself is how an economy is built. in later times. So these cooperatives and all of that, for instance, look at all the villages in South Africa. A village in other African countries and everywhere is an economic unit. In Bangladesh and all of those places, a village acts as a cooperative, where you can even have a cooperative bank of a village in itself. So that is the lesson that I'm saying. You know, if you look at that historical context, you will realize that after 1910, the Boers, they were not yet called the Afrikaners then, the Boers had to depend on each other and said, how are we going to build ourselves economically? The British did not just hand them things on the platter. I mean, they didn't have any universities. They didn't have, actually, I'm even passionate about disputing the fact that the Union of South Africa in 1910 was a union of equals. I mean, after your women and children were killed in concentration camps, you were just given a document to sign to say, from now on, everything below the land belongs to us, belongs to the Queen. That's British imperialism. Remember, it followed the...
But the question I'm asking, I want to stress, it's not about the history. You are running a cooperative. What lessons in your cooperative did you take from the Afrikaners? Is your cooperative succeeding?
Absolutely.
I want to hear that.
Absolutely.
About your cooperative. We won't change them. It's good to know. But for the purposes of this conversation, what are the lessons in your cooperative?
That is why I'm saying we need not think about it as a very abstract thing. As I'm saying, a cooperative. A cooperative is people that live, that have a common bond. That you would say, people of this village, let's form an economic unit because we all buy bread. We all do this. So we have taken all those lessons to start economic activity of professionals along certain areas of interest. For instance, I belong to a number of cooperatives. We started one that we are with Bontate Mafolo called Kilimo Agricultural Cooperative.
I will come to Kilimo. I have a question about Kilimo.
And then there are others, property Stokvels, because professionals, you see, the important thing about the middle class, and the middle class has the power of access to capital and other instruments. So the middle class becomes a buffer for building the community and making sure that even the rural people can develop. The biggest problem in South Africa is that all of us are looking at government to do things for us.
Okay, we have lost a lot of time. Tate Mafolo, let me shift a bit and go north of the Limpopo. You know, President Mbeki, your principal at some point, he came up with an idea of a Pan-African fund. And he actually went with it into the NEPAD space, and I think you were there. And the idea of that fund was that it was going to be funded by pension funds, UIF, and all other government funds in the continent. Now that we are where we are, we need money as a continent. What has happened to that good initiative?
Well,
and
the idea was
what
that
can we do?
The idea was that the idea was to form what was called Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund. And President Mbeki then spoke to our pension fund holders here, PIC, and said, is it possible that you could actually put something together? And then they said, no, we will do that. Then he went throughout the continent, engaged his counterparts and said, from South Africa, we can put an amount of money. Do you have such an institution that can also contribute to this fund? Of course, throughout the continent, they don't have your PIC kind of that we have in this country. But anyway, the little that they had, they said, no, we'll come on board. Botswana, Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, and so on actually came on board. But about 98% of the intended funds were actually coming from South Africa. And so during the 50th anniversary of the Ghana independence in Ghana, in Accra, then it was actually launched that there's going to be a Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund. It's going to be based here in South Africa, and PIC leadership was actually going to run with it. But I think, remember that that happened in 2007, and Polokwane happened. There was a change of leadership, and I think that idea was lost. Okay. And even from our side, as South Africans, we did not pursue that process which was started by us here in South Africa. It was very unfortunate, of course. But it was a very good idea, because it was saying that we can't rely on the countries of the North for our own development. We have to do it ourselves. And I think when we cascade it down to communities, this is what
the same principle. I wanted to say
same principle.
That
yes.
to say, if we can't rely on countries of the North,
yes.
Now when we do community resilience,
exactly.
What can happen in the community?
Exactly. You see, and I think he will elaborate more. But let's take the example of NAFCOC. In 1964, when NAFCOC was formed, and Richard Maponya was elected as president of NAFCOC, the most critical decision that was taken was to create a black bank, an African bank, simply because Africans could not access loans from established banks because they didn't have collateral. They didn't have fixed property because of apartheid. So they said, no, let's create our own bank. In fact, Maponya even said, look, at the time, there are 18 million black people. So if we ask 1 million from each other, we're going to have 18 million, and then we can actually start this thing. Because that was not going to be easy. It was not easy. It's not easy even now. But the idea was there. When Sam Motsuenyane became the president of NAFCOC, he actually pursued it.
So this thing is Sam Motsuenyane, because this is the first segment. This is a long conversation we're going to have. I want to come back to it. And that brings us to the end of today's conversation with Ntate Titus Mafolo and Dr. Zakes Motene in this edition of the Thinc Conversation. It is true that for this economy to be different, it needs much more than the state. Community agency must attract resources. It would be ideal to hear other perspectives on this issue. Until next time, I'm Lucky Mathebula. Thank you.